Otto Berman had always been a man of numbers. At 43 years old, he possessed the kind of mind that could calculate odds faster than most men could shuffle a deck of cards. They called him Abbadabba on the streets of New York, a nickname born from his seemingly magical ability to manipulate betting numbers for Dutch Schultz illegal lottery operation. He wasn't a tough guy, not in the traditional sense. He didn't carry a gun, didn't crack skulls, didn't make threats. His weapon was his intellect, and for years it had made him indispensable. But intellect, Otto had learned, was a double-edged sword in a world that valued brutality over brilliance. He sat now in the defendant's chair of the New York County Courthouse, his wire-rimmed glasses perched on his thin nose, his suit still pressed despite weeks of pre-trial detention. The courtroom hummed with the energy of spectacle. Journalists packed the gallery, their pencils poised. The prosecution team sat smug and confident, occasionally glancing his way with barely concealed contempt. Otto's lawyer, a man named Feldman, who smelled perpetually of cigars and desperation, leaned close and whispered, "They're going to make an example of you. Schultz's whole operation is on trial here, and you're the easiest target." Otto didn't respond immediately. His dark eyes, magnified slightly by his lenses, scanned the courtroom with the same methodical precision he applied to numbers. He noted the judge's impatient expression, the way the lead prosecutor kept touching his tie as if it were a talisman, the nervous energy of the court stenographer whose fingers trembled slightly over the keys. He was reading the room the way he'd read 1,000 betting sheets, looking for patterns, for weaknesses, for angles. "They think I'm just a bookkeeper," Otto finally murmured back to Feldman, "a pencil pusher. They don't understand what I actually do." "Then help me make them understand," Feldman urged. "Give them something, cooperate. The district attorney wants Schultz, not you." Otto allowed himself the smallest of smiles, one that never reached his eyes. "I don't betray my friends, Mr. Feldman. Not for reduced charges, not for freedom, not for anything." The lawyer's face fell. He'd heard rumors about Otto's loyalty, about his strange, almost philosophical adherence to a code that seemed anachronistic in an age where everyone informed on everyone else to save their own skin. But hearing it confirmed made his job infinitely harder. The trial itself had become something of a circus. The prosecution paraded witness after witness, each one testifying to the vast network of illegal gambling that had made Dutch Schultz one of the most powerful men in New York's underworld. They spoke of numbers runners, of rigged races, of payoffs and violence. And through it all, they kept circling back to Otto Berman, the mathematical genius who made it all work. When Otto took the stand in his own defense, something unexpected happened. The lead prosecutor, a man named Morrison, who had built his career on mob prosecutions, tried to humiliate him. He asked questions designed to make Otto look foolish, to reduce him from criminal mastermind to mere functionary. "Mr. Berman," Morrison said with exaggerated politeness, "can you explain to this court exactly what it is you do? In simple terms, please. We're not all mathematical geniuses here." The courtroom tittered with nervous laughter. Otto adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began to speak. What followed was a 15-minute dissertation on probability theory, on the mathematical principles underlying betting odds, on the intricate calculations required to manage a numbers operation across 5 boroughs. He spoke in the calm, measured tone of a university professor, occasionally using the courtroom blackboard to illustrate complex equations. Morrison's face grew redder with each passing minute. The jury looked increasingly confused. The judge interrupted twice to ask Otto to simplify, but Otto seemed incapable of dumbing down his explanation. It wasn't arrogance exactly. It was simply that his mind worked on a level that transcended ordinary comprehension, and he couldn't quite understand why others didn't grasp what seemed obvious to him. By the time he finished, the courtroom had descended into a state somewhere between awe and bewilderment. One journalist would later write that watching Otto Berman testify was like watching a concert pianist explain music theory to a room full of people who'd never seen a piano. Morrison, recovering his composure, switched tactics. "You think you're very clever, don't you, Mr. Berman?" "I think I'm competent at mathematics," Otto replied evenly. "You think you're smarter than everyone in this courtroom." Otto paused, considering the question with a genuine thoughtfulness. "I think I'm better at certain specific tasks than most people, just as a carpenter is better at building furniture than I am. We all have our talents, Mr. Morrison." The prosecutor's jaw tightened. "And your talent is helping criminals steal from honest working people." For the first time, something flickered across Otto's face. Not anger exactly, but a kind of weary recognition. "The people who play the numbers," he said quietly, "they do so of their own free will. Many of them are those same honest working people you mentioned. They play because it gives them hope, a small chance at something better. I merely calculate the odds. I don't force anyone to participate." "How noble," Morrison sneered. "A philosopher criminal." Otto didn't take the bait. He simply looked at the prosecutor with those magnified eyes and said nothing. In that silence, something shifted in the courtroom. Some of the journalists stopped writing. Several jury members leaned forward. Even the judge seemed to reassess the thin man in the witness box. But Otto knew how this would end. He calculated those odds, too. The evidence was overwhelming. His association with Schultz, undeniable. The public wanted blood, wanted to see the mob taken down, and he was the most presentable target. Not scary enough to seem dangerous, not sympathetic enough to engender mercy, just right for a conviction that would make headlines without requiring the messy, violent testimony that targeting Schultz directly would necessitate. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon, guilty on all counts. The judge set sentencing for the following week, and Otto was remanded to custody pending that hearing. As the bailiffs approached to lead him away, he turned to Feldman one last time. Appeal, the lawyer asked hopefully. Otto shook his head. Save your energy for clients who have a chance. I knew what I was doing, and I knew the risks. Now I'll accept the consequences. You're taking this remarkably well. What choice do I have? Otto's voice remained calm, almost philosophical. Panic changes nothing. Anger changes nothing. I'll adapt to whatever comes next, just as I've adapted to everything else in my life. As he was led from the courtroom, Otto caught sight of several men in the gallery. He didn't recognize them all, but he recognized the type: associates of Schultz, representatives of rival organizations, men who were watching very carefully to see if Otto Berman would break, would talk, would become the weak link that prosecutors could exploit. Otto met their eyes briefly, his expression neutral, and then allowed himself to be escorted out. Behind him, the courtroom erupted in conversation. Journalists rushed to phones. The prosecution team congratulated each other. And somewhere in the city, in a speakeasy or a back room or a penthouse office, Dutch Schultz received word that his most valuable nonviolent associate had just been convicted. The holding cell where they kept Otto that night was cold and spare. He sat on the thin mattress, his suit jacket folded neatly beside him, and stared at the cement wall opposite. His mind, incapable of true rest, began running calculations, not escape plans or legal strategies, but probability assessments. What were the odds that someone would try to kill him before sentencing? What were the odds that Schultz would arrange for protection inside whatever prison he was sent to? What were the odds that he'd survive his sentence and emerge on the other side? He smiled slightly at that last calculation. Survival had never been about odds, not really. It had been about adaptability, about reading situations, about understanding that the game was always larger than any individual hand being played. A guard walked past, keys jangling. Otto closed his eyes and forced himself to sleep. In 1 week, the judge would determine his fate. And whatever that fate was, Otto Berman would face it with the same calm calculation he'd brought to everything else in his strange cerebral life. What he couldn't calculate, what no amount of mathematical genius could predict, was that within 7 days of his sentencing, the world he knew would begin to disappear in ways that defied all probability. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning. Otto woke at dawn in his cell, performed his usual routine of calisthenics, 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, stretches that kept his 43-year-old body from stiffening, and waited for the guards to bring breakfast. The oatmeal arrived lukewarm and tasteless, but he ate it methodically, treating nutrition as another calculation, another optimization problem to be solved. Feldman arrived at 9:30 looking more haggard than usual. The judge is in a mood, he warned, as they sat in the small conference room adjacent to the courthouse. Morrison's been pushing for maximum sentencing. They want to make an example. How long, Otto asked. 10 to 15 years, maybe more. Otto absorbed this information without visible reaction. 10 to 15 years. He'd be in his late 50s when released, assuming good behavior. An old man by criminal standards, his mathematical prime long past. All right, he said simply. All right. Feldman's voice cracked slightly. Otto, that's most of what's left of your productive life. It's the consequence of choices I made, fully aware of their potential outcomes, Otto replied. I'm not going to pretend to be surprised or outraged. Let's proceed with dignity. The courtroom was less crowded than during the trial. Most journalists had gotten their headlines, but Otto noticed the same men in the gallery, the watchers, the representatives of the underworld he'd served so proficiently. He noticed one in particular, a man he'd seen before at Schultz's establishments. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. The man met Otto's gaze and gave the smallest of nods. Otto understood. Message received. Schultz had not forgotten him. But what that message actually meant, protection or silencing or simply acknowledgement, remained unclear. The judge entered and everyone rose. Judge Harrington was a severe man in his 60s with white hair and a reputation for harsh sentences in organized crime cases. He'd made his name prosecuting bootleggers during Prohibition, and he viewed the remnants of that era's criminal networks with particular contempt. Mr. Berman, the judge began after the preliminaries, you have been convicted of multiple counts of conspiracy, racketeering, and operating an illegal gambling enterprise. Before I impose sentence, do you have anything to say to this court? Feldman stood, preparing to launch into a prepared statement about Otto's lack of violent history, his cooperation during trial, his remorse. But Otto touched his lawyer's arm gently and stood himself. Your Honor, Otto said, his voice clear and steady, I won't insult your intelligence or this court's time with false contrition. I understood the laws I was breaking. I broke them anyway. I made that choice with full awareness of potential consequences, and I'm prepared to accept whatever sentence you deem appropriate. I would only ask that the court recognize that I never harmed anyone physically, never used violence, never threatened or intimidated. My crimes were crimes of intellect and calculation, not brutality. That's not an excuse, merely a fact that might inform your decision. The judge stared at him for a long moment. You're remarkably honest for a criminal, Mr. Berman. Lying now would serve no purpose, Otto replied, and it would be beneath both of us. Something flickered in Harrington's eyes, surprise perhaps, or reluctant respect, but it didn't change what came next. Otto Berman, I hereby sentence you to 12 years in Sing Sing Correctional Facility with possibility of parole. After 8 years pending good behavior, you will be remanded to custody immediately and transferred within 48 hours. May God have mercy on your soul. The gavel fell. 12 years. Otto nodded once, accepting the sentence as he might accept a particularly unfavorable set of odds. He turned to Feldman, shook his hand, and allowed the bailiffs to approach. As they led him from the courtroom, Otto heard Morrison's voice behind him speaking to a colleague. 12 years, that pompous little bookkeeper will be lucky to survive 12 months inside. Sing will eat him alive. The words were meant to be overheard, meant to intimidate. Otto didn't break stride, didn't acknowledge them, but his mind immediately began recalculating. Prison presented a new set of variables, a new environment requiring adaptation. The men who'd been watching him in the gallery, what role would they play? Would Schultz's influence extend into Sing Sing? And if it did, would that influence protect him or mark him for elimination? The transfer happened faster than expected. Within 24 hours, Otto found himself in a prison bus heading north along the Hudson River toward Ossining, New York, and the infamous Sing Sing prison. He sat shackled between two other prisoners, both younger, both radiating the kind of casual violence that Otto had spent his life avoiding. What you in for? One of them asked. A kid who couldn't have been more than 25 with tattoos crawling up his neck. Gambling, Otto replied simply. The kid laughed. Gambling, man, that's rich. You some kind of bookie. Something like that. You don't look like no gangster. I'm not. Otto adjusted his glasses with his cuffed hands. I was an accountant who happened to work for people who broke certain laws. The other prisoner, older and quieter, studied Otto more carefully. You worked for Dutch Schultz, he said. It wasn't a question. Otto met his eyes but said nothing. Is that right? The tattooed kid's demeanor changed instantly. Shit, man, you're that numbers guy, Abbadabba. I heard about you. Then you heard more than you should have, Otto said quietly. The older prisoner nodded slightly, understanding the message. Don't talk about it. Don't make it a thing. Inside prison, reputation could be protective, or it could paint a target on your back, and the difference often came down to how information spread and who controlled the narrative. They arrived at Sing Sing in late afternoon. The prison loomed against the gray autumn sky, all stone walls and barred windows, and the overwhelming presence of institutionalized control. Otto had read about this place, knew its history, knew its reputation. He'd even calculated in his methodical way what survival might require. But standing in the processing line, being stripped of his civilian clothes, having his head shaved, submitting to the cavity search and medical examination, he felt for the first time since his arrest a genuine tremor of fear. Not fear of physical pain necessarily, though that was certainly a factor, but fear of losing himself, of having his identity stripped away along with his clothes and his hair and his dignity. Otto Berman had always been defined by his mind, by his ability to think and calculate and analyze. What would happen to that identity in a place designed to reduce men to numbers, to break spirits, to enforce absolute conformity? He forced the fear down, compartmentalized it the way he compartmentalized everything. Just another variable to account for, just another probability to calculate. The guard processing him was a thick-necked man named Corrigan with dead eyes and a voice like gravel. You're in Block C, he told Otto. General population, you cause trouble. You go to the hole. You get caught with contraband, you go to the hole. You look at me wrong, you go to the hole. Understand? Yes, sir, Otto replied. You're older than most of the fish we get, Corrigan observed, using the prison slang for new inmates. That's going to make things harder. The young ones, they test the new guys, especially the ones who look soft. Otto said nothing. There was nothing to say. You got people inside. Anyone vouching for you? I don't know, Otto answered honestly. Corrigan grunted. Then keep your head down, do your time quiet, and maybe you make it through, maybe. They assigned Otto to a cell on the third tier. His cellmate was a man named Vincent Rossi, mid-30s, serving time for armed robbery. Vincent was built like a bull, with hands that looked like they could crush rocks, and he regarded Otto with immediate suspicion when the guards locked them in together. "You the new fish?" Vincent asked once they were alone. "Yes." "What's your story?" Otto had already decided on his approach. "Truth, but minimal truth. Gambling operation. 12 years. "Gambling," Vincent repeated, his tone making it clear what he thought of non-violent offenders. "So you're nobody?" "That's correct." Vincent seemed to relax slightly. "All right, here's how this works. That bunk is yours." He pointed to the top bunk. "You don't touch my stuff. You don't talk when I don't want to talk. You don't snore too loud. We got a bathroom schedule. I go in the morning, you go after. Clear?" "Clear. And if anyone asks you questions about me, you don't know nothing. Got it?" "Got it." Vincent studied him for another moment, then nodded and turned away, dismissing Otto from his attention. Otto climbed onto his bunk, the thin mattress barely cushioning the metal frame beneath, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in the cell block, someone was screaming. Somewhere else, someone was laughing. The sounds echoed off concrete and steel, creating a cacophony that Otto's ordered mind struggled to process. He closed his eyes and began counting. Not numbers for gambling, not odds or probabilities, but just pure counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. It was a meditation technique he developed years ago, a way to calm his overactive brain when the calculations threatened to overwhelm him. By the time he reached 1,000, the fear had receded to manageable levels. He opened his eyes and began his real assessment of the situation. Vincent was not overtly hostile, which was fortunate. The cell was perhaps 8 by 10 feet, barely large enough for 2 men and the minimal furnishings. The bars were solid. The guards seemed brutal but not sadistic. The other prisoners he'd glimpsed in the halls ranged from dangerous to desperate. Survival would require careful navigation of social hierarchies he didn't fully understand yet. It would require making himself useful without making himself a target. It would require exactly the kind of strategic thinking he'd applied to numbers, but applied instead to human behavior in its most primitive form. Otto had never been particularly social. He'd never been good at reading people's emotions or understanding the unspoken rules of human interaction. His talent had always been with abstract systems, with mathematical relationships, with logical progressions, but he was nothing if not adaptable, and he would learn these new rules just as he'd learned everything else. The first test came sooner than expected. On his third day, during the evening rec period in the yard, Otto was approached by 3 younger prisoners while he stood alone near the weight area. They moved with the practiced coordination of predators who'd done this before. "Hey, old man," the leader said. He was maybe 22 with prison muscles and a swastika tattooed on his forearm. "You got commissary money?" Otto had been expecting something like this. Prison economics ran on cigarettes, favors, and violence. New inmates were always tested. "No," he said simply. "No?" The kid smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. "That's not the right answer. See, there's a tax for new fish. You pay it or we collect it another way." The other 2 spread out slightly, flanking Otto. He noted their positions, calculated his extremely limited options. He was outnumbered, outweighed, and hadn't been in a physical fight since he was a teenager. Running would mark him as weak. Complying would mark him as an easy target for future exploitation, which left only one option, however unpleasant. "I understand there are social hierarchies here," Otto said calmly, his voice carrying none of the fear he felt. "And I understand that establishing dominance over new arrivals is part of that system. But I'm not going to give you money I don't have, and I'm not going to pretend to be intimidated by threats." The leader's smile vanished. "You think you're smart? Think you're better than us?" "No," Otto replied. "I think I'm just another prisoner trying to survive his sentence, same as you." "Same as me?" The kid's face darkened. "I don't think so, old man. I think you need to learn some respect." He moved fast, faster than Otto anticipated. His fist drove into Otto's stomach, doubling him over. Before Otto could recover, another punch caught him on the side of the head, sending his glasses flying. The world went blurry. He felt hands grabbing him, shoving him against the concrete wall. Through the haze, Otto heard Vincent's voice. "Back off now." The hands released him. Otto slid down the wall, gasping, his vision swimming. When his eyes finally focused, he saw Vincent standing between him and his attackers, and several other men had appeared behind Vincent. Larger men, older men, men with the kind of presence that commanded attention. "This fish is vouched for," Vincent said quietly. "You got a problem with that? Take it up with the family." The leader of the young predators looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Vincent's eyes stopped him. "Didn't know," he muttered. "Nobody said nothing." "Now you know," Vincent replied. "Move along." They left. Shooting hostile glances back at Otto, Vincent turned and offered his hand, pulling Otto to his feet with surprising gentleness. "You all right?" Otto nodded, retrieving his glasses. One lens was cracked. "Thank you," he managed. Don't thank me yet, Vincent said. Come on, we need to talk. They took Otto to the infirmary, a sterile room that smelled of disinfectant and desperation. The prison doctor, a tired-looking man named Kellerman, examined him with the kind of detached efficiency that spoke to years of treating injuries, both accidental and intentional. Bruised ribs, Kellerman announced, dressing Otto's side and making him wince. Possible concussion from that headshot. You're lucky they didn't break anything. Doesn't feel lucky, Otto muttered, each breath sending sharp pains through his torso. You new fish learn the hard way or the easy way, Kellerman said, not unkindly. You seem to have chosen the hard way. I'll wrap your ribs and give you some aspirin. That's all I can do. As the doctor worked, Vincent stood nearby with two other men Otto hadn't been formally introduced to. One was in his 50s, gray-haired but powerfully built, with calculating eyes that reminded Otto uncomfortably of his own. The other was younger, maybe 35, with slick-back hair and a pinky ring that somehow he'd been allowed to keep. Otto Berman, the older man, said when the doctor finished, I'm Tony Marcelli. You worked for Dutch Schultz. I did, Otto confirmed, holding his wrapped ribs gingerly. Schultz sent word before you arrived, said you were stand-up, that you didn't talk during your trial, said to keep an eye on you. Otto processed this information carefully. So Schultz's reach did extend into Sing Sing. I appreciate the protection, he said. It ain't free, Marcelli replied bluntly. Nothing in here is you got skills, Berman. We can use those skills. You help us, we help you. Simple arrangement. What kind of help are we discussing? The younger man smiled. We run certain operations inside. Sports betting, mostly numbers games, same kind of thing you did for Schultz, just smaller scale. We need someone who can keep the books, calculate the odds, make sure the splits are fair. Otto understood immediately. They wanted him to do exactly what he'd done on the outside, just with cigarettes instead of dollars, and with the ever-present threat of solitary confinement instead of prosecution. But what choice did he have? Refusing would mean losing their protection, and without protection, he wouldn't last a month. All right, he said. I'll help. Marcelli nodded, satisfied. Smart choice. Vincent will fill you in on the details. But Berman, one thing you got to understand, inside loyalty means even more than it did outside. You cross us, you don't just get beat up, you disappear. Understand? I understand. Good. Get some rest. You start work in 3 days once those ribs heal up enough for you to move around. They left him in the infirmary overnight for observation. Otto lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing despite his physical exhaustion. He'd escaped one criminal organization only to be conscripted into another. But this time there was no pretense of choice, no illusion of free will. This was pure survival. The next morning, they released him back to his cell. Vincent was waiting, and his demeanor had shifted from cold tolerance to something almost friendly. You did good not begging those punks, Vincent said, as Otto carefully climbed onto his bunk. Begging just makes them worse. Better to take your beating and keep your dignity. Is that the rule here? Otto asked. Dignity through violence. Vincent shrugged. Ain't no other kind of dignity in a place like this. You show weakness, you're done. You show strength. Even if you lose, people remember. Those kids who jumped you, they won't try again. You took your lumps without crying, and now you got family backing. That's respect. Respect built on fear. All respect is built on fear, Vincent countered. Outside, inside don't matter. People respect what they're afraid to challenge. You were never afraid, not really. I could see it in your eyes. You were just calculating, figuring odds. That's why Marcelli wants you. You think like them. Otto wanted to argue, to say he didn't think like criminals, but the words stuck in his throat. Because Vincent was right. Otto had always thought in terms of systems and calculations, and morality had been just another variable in his equations. He'd never robbed anyone at gunpoint, never hurt anyone directly, but he'd enabled an entire criminal enterprise with his mathematical genius. The blood on his hands was invisible, but no less real. The 3 days of recovery passed slowly. Otto's ribs ached constantly, turning purple and yellow as the bruises bloomed. His cracked glasses made reading difficult, but Vincent managed to get him a replacement pair through some commissary connection Otto didn't want to know about. During those days, Otto observed the prison's rhythms. Breakfast at 6, work details from 8 to 3, dinner at 5, rec time until 7, lockdown at 8. The days blended together, each one identical to the last, a monotony designed to break the spirit as surely as the violence and degradation. He learned the unspoken rules. Don't look at anyone too long. Don't ask questions. Don't volunteer information. Stay in your designated areas. Respect the boundaries between different groups, the Italians, the Irish, the blacks, the Aryans, each with their own territories and hierarchies. Violence erupted regularly, sudden and brutal, and the guards responded with their own violence, billy clubs cracking skulls, men dragged to solitary confinement. Otto saw a man stabbed in the lunch line over a dispute about something trivial. He saw guards beat an inmate unconscious for talking back. He saw things he'd never imagined in his ordered mathematical life, and each horror forced him to recalculate what survival might actually require. On the fourth day, Vincent escorted him to meet with Marcelli's operation. They gathered in the library during work detail, a group of 8 men, including Otto. Marcelli presided over what looked like a normal study session, but was actually a criminal planning meeting. Here's how it works, Marcelli explained, spreading papers across the table. Every week, guys place bets on sporting events. Football, baseball, boxing, whatever's happening. We collect the bets, track them, pay out the winners. The house takes 20%. Your job is to keep everything straight, make sure the odds are fair, make sure nobody's cheating the system. Otto examined the papers. They created a crude but functional tracking system using coded language and hidden ledgers. Who manages the money? There's no actual currency in here. Cigarettes, mostly. The younger man, who Otto learned was named Danny Greco, explained, each pack is worth a set amount. We convert everything to cigarette values. Simple exchange rate. And the guards, some are on the payroll, some look the other way. Some we avoid. Marcelli fixed Otto with a hard stare. Your job is just the numbers. You see nothing else. You know nothing else. Clear? Clear. They spent the next hour going over the system. Otto's mathematical mind absorbed it quickly, noting inefficiencies and potential improvements, but wisely keeping most observations to himself. He suggested only small changes, careful not to seem like he was trying to take over or show off his expertise. After the meeting, as they walked back to the cell block, Vincent said quietly, "You're thinking too much again. I can see it on your face." Am I that transparent? To someone who knows what to look for, you got that look people get when they're calculating, like you're 3 moves ahead of everyone else. Is that a problem? Vincent considered this. Could be. Make some people nervous. Marcelli likes that you're smart, but he don't want you thinking you're smarter than him. You've got to be useful without being threatening. It's a careful balance. I'm beginning to understand that survival in here is all about balance, Otto said. Between strength and submission, between visibility and invisibility, between having value and being disposable. Now you're getting it. Vincent clapped him on the shoulder, making Otto wince. Sorry, forgot about the ribs. That night, lying in his bunk, Otto thought about the life he'd left behind. Not Schultz's criminal empire, but earlier, his childhood in Brooklyn, son of German immigrants who'd run a small grocery store. His talent for mathematics recognized early by teachers who'd pushed him toward college. The brief, legitimate period of his life when he'd worked as an actual accountant for actual businesses. Then the Depression hit. The legitimate work dried up. And a man named Dutch Schultz had offered him a job calculating odds for an illegal lottery. Good money, steady work, and Otto had rationalized it. Everyone was breaking some law or another to survive. At least he wasn't hurting anyone directly. So that rationalization seemed hollow now, lying in a prison bunk with bruised ribs and a cracked lens, surrounded by men whose violence was more honest than his mathematical manipulation. They didn't pretend to be anything other than criminals. Otto had pretended his crimes were somehow more dignified, more intellectual, less real. The next week settled into a routine. Otto managed Marcelli's betting operation with the same efficiency he'd brought to Schultz's numbers game. He calculated odds, tracked bets, reconciled accounts, all using coded ledgers and hidden documentation. The work was actually easier than his previous job. Fewer variables, smaller scale, more predictable patterns. But the environment took its toll. The constant tension wore on him. The noise, the violence, the degradation, the dehumanization. He'd always prided himself on his ability to adapt, to maintain his analytical detachment. But Sing Sing was designed to break that detachment, to grind men down to their most basic elements. Otto started having nightmares, mathematical nightmares, where numbers spiraled out of control, where calculations led to impossible results, where the ordered systems he relied on collapsed into chaos. He'd wake gasping, his heart racing, Vincent's concerned face above him in the darkness. "You all right?" Vincent would ask. "Fine," Otto would lie, "just a dream." But they weren't just dreams. They were his mind's way of processing trauma, of trying to maintain order in an environment fundamentally hostile to order. And Otto worried that eventually the chaos would win, that he'd lose the one thing that made him who he was, his ability to think clearly, to calculate precisely, to find patterns in randomness. 3 months into his sentence, on a cold January morning, Otto's careful balance finally collapsed. It started during a routine betting reconciliation. Otto was in the library with Marcelli and Danny Greco going over the week's accounts when one of the numbers didn't add up. Someone had placed a bet that didn't appear in the ledgers, but the payout had been recorded. "There's a discrepancy," Otto said, pointing to the entry. "Someone received cigarettes for a winning bet that was never officially logged." Marcelli's face darkened. "How much?" 20 packs. "That's a lot of cigarettes to just disappear," Danny said. "Who handled this bet?" Otto checked his coded notations. According to this, it should have been Vincent. The room went quiet. Vincent, who'd been standing guard by the door, turned slowly. "What are you saying?" "I'm not saying anything," Otto replied carefully. I'm just reporting what the numbers show. Someone took a bet off book and paid it out. The notation suggests it was your collection round. Vincent's expression was unreadable, and you think I'm skimming? I think there's a discrepancy that needs explaining. Marcelli stood up, his chair scraping loudly. Vincent's been with me 10 years. You've been here 3 months. Who should I believe? Otto felt his pulse quicken, but he kept his voice steady. The numbers don't lie. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm simply pointing out an irregularity that needs to be investigated. Investigated, Marcelli repeated the word like it tasted bad. You think you're still in some courtroom, Berman. You think we investigate things in here. I think if your operation has integrity, yes, you investigate irregularities. The backhand came so fast, Otto didn't see it. Marcelli's palm cracked across his face, sending him stumbling backward. Continue 1-4-49. His glasses flew off again, clattering on the floor. Without them, the world dissolved into blurry shapes and colors. You don't question my people, Marcelli said, his voice deadly quiet. You especially don't question Vincent. He vouched for you, he saved your ass, and this is how you repay him. Otto's face throbbed. He could taste blood where his cheek had split against his teeth, but his mind was still calculating, still trying to find the path through this. If Vincent didn't take the bet, then someone's trying to make it look like he did, which means someone's trying to undermine your operation. Don't you want to know who? Marcelli grabbed Otto by his shirt, pulling him close. What I want is for you to do your job without causing problems. Can you do that? Otto met his eyes, trying to read the situation through his fear and his blurred vision. He saw anger, yes, but also something else. Uncertainty, doubt. Marcelli wasn't as sure as he pretended to be. I can do my job, Otto said quietly, but my job is to make sure the numbers are accurate. If you don't want that, if you want me to just rubber stamp whatever happens, then you don't need me. Anyone can do that. For a long moment, Marcelli held him there, and Otto thought he might be about to receive a much worse beating than the one he'd gotten in the yard. But then Marcelli released him, shoving him back. Vincent, Marcelli said, not looking away from Otto, you know anything about this bet? No, Vincent replied, his voice tight. I logged every bet I took. Someone's playing games. Marcelli turned to Danny. Pull the records. Check everything from the last week. I want to know who's trying to make Vincent look bad. As Danny hurried to comply, Marcelli turned back to Otto. You better hope this pans out the way you think, Berman, because if you're wrong, if you just cause problems over nothing, you're going in the hole for a month, and when you come out, you won't have any protection. Understand? I understand. They found Otto's glasses and returned them. One lens was cracked now in 2 places, but he could see well enough. Over the next 2 hours, they reconstructed every bet placed that week, and slowly a pattern emerged. Someone had indeed placed an off-book bet and paid it out, but the handwriting in the coded notation was subtly different from Vincent's. Someone had tried to forge his style. They figured out who by process of elimination, a young runner named Mickey who'd been trying to skim from the operation for weeks. When confronted, he broke down immediately, admitting everything. Marcelli had him beaten severely and transferred to another cell block, which in prison terms meant complete ostracism from the protection and privileges of the Italian organization. Otto had been right, but being right hadn't made him any friends. That night in their cell, Vincent sat on his bunk staring at Otto for a long time. You almost got me killed today, Vincent finally said. I almost saved you from being blamed for someone else's theft, Otto countered. Same thing from where I'm sitting. You could have come to me first. Asked me about it quiet. But you went straight to Marcelli. Otto nodded slowly. You're right. I should have handled it differently. I was thinking about the numbers, not the people. That was a mistake. Vincent seemed surprised by the admission. Yeah, it was, I'm sorry. You can't operate in here like you did outside, Otto. Out there, you can just deal with numbers, with abstract systems. In here, everything's personal. Everything's about relationships and respect and reading people. You're smart, maybe the smartest guy I ever met, but you're also kind of stupid about people. You know that? Otto smiled slightly despite his aching face. I've been told that before. Then maybe start listening. Vincent lay back on his bunk. You did right by me today, even if you did it wrong. I appreciate that. But next time, think about the human element before you think about the math. I'll try. But trying wasn't enough. 2 days later, Marcelli summoned Otto again. This time his demeanor was cold, businesslike. You're done with the betting operation, Marcelli said flatly. Otto's stomach dropped because of what happened with Mickey. Because you're a liability. You're too rigid, too by the book. This operation requires flexibility, requires understanding that sometimes the numbers don't matter as much as keeping everyone happy. You can't do that. I can learn. No, Marcelli said. You can't. It ain't in your nature. You see a discrepancy, you got to point it out. You see something wrong, you got to fix it. That kind of honesty gets people killed in here. So what happens now? Marcelli shrugged. You're on your own. We won't protect you anymore, but we won't come after you either. You kept your mouth shut about the operation, and you did help us catch Mickey. That counts for something, but we're done. Vincent tried to argue on Otto's behalf, but Marcelli shut him down. The decision was final. Otto Berman was no longer under the protection of the Italian organization. That night, lying in his bunk, Otto faced the reality of his situation. He was 43 years old, physically unremarkable, with no violent skills and no criminal network to rely on. In a prison population of younger, stronger, more dangerous men, he was now completely vulnerable. The old fear returned, the one he'd felt during his first days in Sing Sing. But this time, instead of trying to suppress it or calculate around it, Otto let himself feel it fully. He acknowledged his terror, his helplessness, his complete lack of control. And in that acknowledgement, something shifted. He couldn't control the prison. He couldn't control the other inmates. He couldn't control whether he'd be attacked or left alone. But he could control how he responded to whatever came. He could control his mind, his dignity, his sense of self. Otto began developing what he thought of as a mental survival protocol. Every morning he would wake at 5 o'clock before the general wake-up call and spend 30 minutes in meditation. Not traditional meditation, he'd never been spiritual, but kind of mental inventory. He would assess his physical state, his emotional state, his current threats and opportunities. Then he would exercise push-ups, sit-ups, stretches, everything he could do in the confines of his cell. His body would never be strong by prison standards, but he could at least maintain what strength and flexibility he had. After breakfast, during work details, Otto volunteered for the library. The prison library was understaffed and poorly maintained, and the librarian, an older guard named Henderson, who seemed less brutal than most, accepted Otto's help gratefully. Otto spent his days organizing books, repairing damaged volumes, helping illiterate prisoners learn to read. It wasn't glamorous work, and it didn't come with protection or privileges, but it gave Otto's days structure and purpose, and slowly, gradually, it gave him something else. Relationships, not friendships exactly, but connections. Men who appreciated his help learning to read, guards who recognized his diligence. Other prisoners who used the library as a refuge from the violence and chaos of prison life. Otto never talked about his past, never mentioned Schultz or his trial or his mathematical abilities. He made himself useful without making himself valuable. He helped without expecting anything in return. And in doing so, he created a different kind of safety, not the safety of fear and organization, but the safety of being seen as harmless and helpful. Vincent watched this transformation with something like admiration. "You're adapting," he said one evening, "finding your niche." "Trying to," Otto replied, "though I'm not sure how successful I'll be. More successful than most. You know what separates the guys who make it from the guys who break? It ain't strength or toughness. It's the ability to find meaning in this place, to create something, even something small that makes the time bearable. You're doing that." Winter turned to spring, spring to summer. Otto's first year in Sing Sing passed in a blur of routine and small victories. He taught a man named Jackson to read well enough to write letters to his daughter. He helped organize the library's collection, creating a card catalog system that made finding books actually possible. He started a weekly reading group where prisoners could discuss books, not because anyone made them, but because they wanted to. It wasn't the life Otto had imagined, but it was a life, and more than that, it was a life he'd created through his own efforts without relying on criminal connections or mathematical manipulation. For the first time since his arrest, Otto felt something like pride, but he also felt something else, something he couldn't quite name, a sense of impermanence, of waiting for something. He couldn't shake the feeling that his careful balance was temporary, that events beyond his control were moving towards some inevitable conclusion. The feeling proved prophetic in a way Otto never could have calculated. On a humid August evening, 18 months into his sentence, Vincent returned to their cell with news that drained the blood from Otto's face. "Dutch Schultz is dead," Vincent said quietly, closing the cell door behind him. "Shot yesterday in Newark. Him, Abbadabba Berman, and 2 others, all dead." Otto sat down slowly on his bunk, his mind reeling. "Abbadabba Berman, but that's me, I'm Abbadabba." Vincent looked confused. "No, the real Abbadabba, the numbers guy who worked for Schultz." "That was me," Otto said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am the numbers guy. I am Abbadabba Berman." Understanding dawned on Vincent's face, followed by shock. "Wait, you're telling me that you're the Abbadabba? The guy they shot in Newark yesterday?" "I was arrested and tried over a year ago," Otto said, his mind racing through the impossibility of what he was hearing. "I've been in here the whole time. How could I have been shot yesterday in Newark?" They sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. Either the news was wrong or something impossible had happened, or there was a third explanation that neither of them wanted to voice. Someone else had been using Otto's name and identity. Over the next few days, as more details filtered in through the prison grapevine, the truth emerged. Dutch Schultz had been shot in the Palace Chop House in Newark along with 3 associates. One of them had been identified as Otto Abbadabba Berman. But the body, when examined, was not Otto Berman at all. It was another man, someone who'd apparently taken Otto's place in Schultz's organization after Otto's imprisonment. The real question was why? Why would someone assume the identity of a convicted criminal? Why would Schultz allow or encourage it? And what did it mean for the real Otto, sitting in a prison cell, legally alive but publicly dead? Someone wanted people to think you were dead, Vincent said, when they pieced together what they could. Question is who and why? Otto thought about the men who'd watched him in the courtroom, about Marcelli's connections, about the complex web of criminal relationships that extended far beyond what he'd understood. Maybe, he said slowly, someone wanted to protect me. If the world thinks I'm dead, if the authorities think I'm dead, then I'm no longer a potential witness, no longer a threat. Or a target, Vincent added. You kept your mouth shut during your trial, didn't flip on Schultz. That earned you respect, but it also made you valuable, and valuable people can be dangerous to keep around, so they killed my identity instead of killing me. Maybe. Or maybe it's even simpler. Maybe Schultz needed a numbers guy after you got sent up, found someone who could do the work, and when that guy got killed, the cops just assumed it was you because the name matched mistaken identity. Otto shook his head. That would be too much of a coincidence. No, someone orchestrated this. Someone wanted me officially dead. The question haunted him for weeks. He read every newspaper article he could find about Schultz's murder. The reports were consistent. Dutch Schultz, Marcus Marty, Krompier, Abe Landau, and Otto Abbadabba Berman had all been shot. Schultz lingered for a day in the hospital, giving delirious testimony that made no sense before dying. The others died at the scene or shortly after. But Otto was alive. Otto was in prison. Otto had an alibi more solid than any alibi could be. He'd been locked in a maximum security facility at the exact time of the shooting. When he finally worked up the courage, Otto wrote to his lawyer, Feldman, explaining the situation, asking what it meant legally. The response came 3 weeks later. Mr. Berman, Feldman wrote, this is indeed an unusual situation. However, I must advise you that correcting the public record would serve no useful purpose and might actually harm your current position. Legally, your sentence and status are unaffected. The courts know you're alive, as does the prison system. What the newspapers say is irrelevant to your legal situation. Moreover, bringing attention to the discrepancy might raise questions about your potential knowledge of Schultz's operations that could lead to additional prosecution. My advice is to let the dead bury the dead, so to speak. Serve your time. Maintain your privacy. When you're eventually released, you can resume your life under your own name without the baggage of your criminal associations. In a strange way, being dead might be the best thing that could have happened to you. Otto read the letter multiple times, processing its implications. Feldman was right, of course. If the world thought Otto Berman was dead, then when he was eventually released from prison, he could truly start over. No one would be looking for him. No criminal associates would come calling. No prosecutors would try to pressure him into testifying. He would be free in a way few ex-convicts ever were. But it also meant a complete severing from his past. His family, what little he had, would think him dead. His friends, if he'd ever really had any, would mourn him. Otto Berman, the mathematical genius who'd worked for Dutch Schultz, would exist only as a footnote in mob history. A man shot in a chop house in Newark. A casualty of the gang wars that defined the era. The real Otto Berman would have to become someone else, not legally perhaps, but practically, psychologically. He would have to let go of the identity he'd built over 43 years and construct something new. It was Otto realized what he'd already been doing. In prison, he'd stopped being Abbadabba, the numbers genius. He'd become Otto the librarian, Otto the reading teacher, Otto the quiet man who helped other prisoners navigate the complexities of literacy and literature. He'd already been building a new identity based not on criminal calculation but on genuine service. The thought both terrified and liberated him. You're thinking again, Vincent observed one evening, watching Otto stare at Feldman's letter for the 100th time. Always, Otto replied. What's the calculation this time? Otto smiled slightly. I'm trying to calculate the value of a second chance, the probability of successful rehabilitation. The odds that a man can truly change his fundamental nature. What do the numbers tell you? That there are no numbers for things like this, that some questions can't be answered by mathematics alone. Vincent nodded sagely. Now you're learning. The remaining years of Otto's sentence passed with increasing speed. He worked in the library, expanded his reading group, taught dozens of men to read and write. He never spoke about his past, never mentioned Schultz or the numbers racket or his public death. He became, in the eyes of most who knew him, just another prisoner doing his time with unusual dignity and grace. He received no visitors, no letters except from Feldman, and those became increasingly rare. His family, believing him dead, moved on with their lives. Otto existed in a strange limbo, alive but dead, present but absent, a ghost in a living body. But he found peace in that limbo. The constant calculations that had once dominated his every waking moment gradually quieted. He still had a gift for mathematics, still saw patterns others missed, but he no longer let that gift define him. Instead, he focused on human connections, on helping others, on finding meaning in the small daily acts of kindness and service. Vincent, who'd remained his cellmate throughout, witnessed the transformation with something approaching wonder. "You came in here as one person," he said during Otto's final week before parole, "and you're leaving as someone completely different." "Am I?" Otto asked. "Or was this always who I was, buried under layers of calculation and criminal association? Does it matter?" "I suppose not." On the morning of his release, 8 years after his arrival, Otto walked out of Sing Sing with a cheap suit, $47 in discharge money, and a new Social Security card issued under his real name, a name the world thought belonged to a dead man. He stood outside the prison gates, breathing free air for the first time in 8 years, and felt overwhelmed by the sheer breadth of possibility. He could go anywhere, be anyone. The Otto Berman who'd worked for Dutch Schultz was dead. The Otto Berman standing here was a blank slate. Vincent had been released 2 months earlier and had left an address where Otto could find him, a boarding house in Queens, a job possibility at a legitimate accounting firm. "They owe me a favor," Vincent had explained before his own release, "and you're going straight. I can feel it. So when you get out, come find me. We'll get you set up proper." Otto took a bus to Queens, found the boarding house, and knocked on Vincent's door. When it opened, Vincent grinned and pulled him into a rough embrace. "Welcome back to the world, Otto. It's good to be back." They went to a diner, and over coffee and eggs, Otto told Vincent his plan. He would use his real name, would seek legitimate work, would rebuild his life without any criminal connections, would live quietly and honestly, grateful for his second chance. "What about the money you must have stashed away?" Vincent asked. "From your Schultz days, that could set you up nice." Otto shook his head. "I never took more than my salary, never skimmed, never saved illicitly. What little I had is long gone, seized, or spent. I'm starting from nothing." "That's crazy. You could be living easy." "Easy money is how I ended up in prison," Otto replied. "I'm done calculating angles and working systems. I'm going to live simply, work honestly, and maybe, if I'm very fortunate, find some measure of peace." Vincent studied him for a long moment, then raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To Otto Berman, may he rest in peace, and to whoever you're becoming, may he live long and well." Otto clinked his cup against Vincent's. "I'll drink to that." The accounting job Vincent arranged was basic work, bookkeeping for a small import company in Brooklyn. The pay was modest, the work unchallenging for someone of Otto's abilities, but it was honest, legal, and stable. Otto rented a tiny apartment, bought some secondhand furniture, and settled into a routine that would have seemed impossibly mundane to his former self. He worked, he read, he took walks, he volunteered at a local literacy center, teaching adults to read just as he'd done in prison. He made no friends, sought no relationships, lived in quiet solitude, but it wasn't a lonely solitude. It was chosen, peaceful, meditative. On the anniversary of his release, Otto visited the library and looked up the newspaper accounts of his own death. He read about the shooting at the Palace Chop House, about Dutch Schultz's delirious final words, about Otto Abbadabba Berman, mathematical genius, dying in a pool of his own blood. He thought about the man who'd actually died, whoever he was, the man who'd taken Otto's identity and lost his life for it. Otto whispered a prayer for him. This unknown person who'd given Otto the ultimate gift, a chance to disappear, to start over, to live. Years passed. Otto grew older, grayer, more bent. He continued his quiet life, his honest work. He never married, never sought fame or fortune. He existed in the margins of society, a ghost with a beating heart. Sometimes late at night, he would take out his old glasses, the ones with the cracked lenses from his beating in Sing Sing, and remember who he'd been, the arrogant mathematician who thought he could calculate his way through life. The criminal associate who believed his intellect made him better than those who used violence. The prisoner who'd learned slowly and painfully that dignity came not from being clever, but from being kind. And he would think about all the men he'd met in prison, the violent ones and the broken ones, the lifers and the short-timers, Vincent and Marcelli and the guard Henderson and Jackson who learned to write to his daughter, all of them struggling to maintain their humanity in an environment designed to destroy it. Otto had survived. More than survived, he'd emerged with his soul intact, perhaps even improved. He'd learned lessons that no amount of mathematical genius could have taught him about humility, about service, about the difference between being smart and being wise. In his final years, Otto sometimes spoke to groups at the literacy center about the importance of second chances. He never mentioned his criminal past or his time in prison. He simply spoke about the transformative power of education, about the dignity that came from helping others, about the possibility of change. When he died at 78, the obituary was small. Otto Berman, retired accountant and literacy volunteer, passed peacefully in his sleep. No mention of Dutch Schultz, no reference to Sing Sing, no acknowledgement that he'd already been reported dead 43 years earlier. Just a quiet ending to a quiet life lived honestly after so many years of calculation and compromise. But Vincent, who'd maintained sporadic contact over the decades, knew the whole story, and at Otto's funeral, attended by a handful of people from the Literacy Center and a few former students, Vincent spoke briefly. Otto was the smartest man I ever met, Vincent said, but what made him truly remarkable wasn't his intelligence, it was his capacity for change. He could have spent his life bitter about the hand he was dealt. Instead, he chose to become something better. That takes a kind of courage that has nothing to do with being tough and everything to do with being honest with yourself and with the world. Otto Berman, the real Otto Berman, was the bravest man I knew. As they lowered the casket, Vincent placed on top of it a single item, Otto's old glasses from Sing Sing, the lenses still cracked, carefully preserved for 40 years, a reminder of the man Otto had been and the journey he'd traveled to become someone better. The numbers had ruled Otto's life for so long, but in the end, the only calculation that mattered was the simplest one. Did he live a good life? Did he help more than he hurt? Did he leave the world slightly better than he found it? And to those questions, the answer was yes. Not through mathematical certainty, but through the accumulation of small kindness, quiet dignity, and the courage to change. Otto Berman died twice, once in newspaper headlines, shot in a Newark chop house, and once for real decades later in a small apartment in Brooklyn. But between those two deaths, he truly lived. And that life, however quiet and unnoticed, was his greatest calculation, his final perfect equation. The answer to a question he'd spent years afraid to ask: what is the value of a man who chooses to be better than his circumstances? What is the worth of dignity maintained in the face of degradation? What is the measure of a soul that refuses to be broken? The numbers in the end didn't matter. What mattered was the choice, and Otto chose well.